Black spaces. Okay, here we go. All right. Once again, welcome everyone. Before I forget, I have to introduce myself briefly. I'm Grace from the Quantic engagement team. If you don't know me or my team, our team does things like this, bring amazing events to our students and alumni. And we also to handle a lot of student support. I work with alumni. Anyway, we're kind of everywhere where you are, hopefully, and then also to bring the world to you as well. Go ahead and let us know where you're calling in from and what you're eating or drinking. If for some reason people are very willing to talk about what they're eating and drinking, and I will definitely have my water here. Just before I get going into the fun stuff, let me just go over really the boring stuff right away. Of course, please keep yourself muted. We will have, as you can see, the numbers growing. We will have quite a crowd today. And you will be enjoying the conversation from the comfort of where you are and listening in. And of course, you will get to interact as well. So as we're getting into the event, you're welcome to use the comment box, comments, questions, whatnot, and we will, so that will be part of the conversation. But of course, myself and our guest today, Paul, will be having our conversation on screen. So that's that. And let me also put in the comment box for you. We always do this in our events. If you're familiar with Quantic events, we always have a contact sheet, which is just a simple spreadsheet where you can add your information if you all want to network with each other. There are quite a few of you here, and I'm going to guess a lot of you don't know each other. So this is a great way to meet new people. And who knows, you may find your future business partner here. So feel free to use that contact sheet that I just posted there. And I will not really be looking at the comment box a whole lot because there's a lot going on. So you guys all behave in there while I do my part. So let me officially, again, welcome you to today's event, the blockchain, a world computer for the future economy. Let me actually unshare so we can see each other. And today's conversation will be with Paul Meeusen from the Dfinity Foundation. As some of you may know, Quantic has been hosting events and sharing content based on some themes, and all of them with an eye for the future, of course. And one of them is digital futures. And also, you may know, especially if you've gone through our content and are a student or alumni, one of a fan favorite course has been our blockchain, actually. In fact, people, when they finish, they're like, give me more, Quantic, make more, please. So while we're working on making more courses and things like that, we want to bring events like this to you because so many of you are so keen to understand more and just learn more about blockchain and other technologies as well. So now today's conversation, like I mentioned, is interactive. We see it as incredibly relevant to all of you and a multi-dimensional conversation, all of us interested in tech and all of us interested in the future. And as you also know, with Quantic events, we have such a diverse audience, industry diversity, cultural diversity, expertise. So there's a range of people in this audience. And I know some of you are experts and some of you may know probably as little as I do. So keep in mind, our events are ultimately for all of you to learn and to kind of continue to foster your curiosity. So, and I'm going to make sure, if all of you can make sure you're muted. Let me just double check. Okay, now, today is a bit of a crew. Actually, in order to bring this event to you, it required a few different people here. Actually, let me see, is Jordan here? I'm looking down the list. He is not. It's okay. Actually, for some of you, you may know Jordan Smith. You may not. It's okay. He's one of our alumni. He's actually the one who started this conversation and brought the idea of this event to me. And you know how we work. If we can do it, we'll roll it out quickly, because if we know it's something interesting to you, we'll do it. But let me also, before we get into the main event, I want to introduce Javier to you. Javier, he works with Dfinity Foundation as well. Javier, would you say hi to the audience?
Yes, hello. Thank you, Grace, for your briefly introduction. Yes, I'm Javier Arroyo, currently working on the special projects team at Dfinity Foundation, focusing on organizing events at the universities and business schools in North America, among all the other things. Also, I'm the host of the podcast Let's Talk Internet Computer, where I interview founders, engineers, and crypto enthusiasts for the internet computer ecosystem. And then on the other hand, I would like to have a few words of thanks to the people involved in this initiative. Thanks to Quantic School for the support and trust they have given us to organize the event, especially to Grace Liu, the program experience lead at Quantic School, and as well Kelsey Dugan, Associate Director of Brand Marketing at Quantic School. Many thanks also to Jordan Smith, the co-founder of Signet, who was the one who started everything and introduced me to Grace, to the formidable people of Quantic as well. And finally, I would like to thank my colleagues and the speaker today, Paul Meeusen, Vice President of Finance at Definitive Foundation, for his support and interest in this initiative as well. And I will be active on the chat. If someone have questions or anything, please feel free to drop in your questions, and I try to do my best to respond to everything. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Javier. Thank goodness, because I have a feeling there'll be questions that we may or may not get to all of it. And by the way, just know that if you do have questions, obviously definitely drop them into the comment box. We just may or may not get to them, and we'll get through as much as we can. But now, finally, I get to introduce our guest of honor today. Paul Meeusen is with us today. He is VP of Finance at Definitive Foundation. He's an experienced entrepreneur, finance and risk manager. He co-founded the insurance blockchain firm B3I and was selected by Accord among the top 10 insurtech leaders in 2018. Prior to this, he spent 25 years in finance, risk, operations, and audit management roles at Swiss Re and Pricewaterhouse and across US, Asia, and Europe. So Paul has done quite a bit, I think, and it's so great to have him in the audience. I've actually learned quite a bit just having a couple of conversations with him. And I'll be honest, guys, so for those of you who know me, I'm always a little bit nervous for these events because I'm introducing guests with this amazing expertise and background that I actually don't know a lot about, but I think that's the beauty of these conversations. It is meant to bring all of us together. So I will stop here. I would love to pass the mic to Paul now so he can introduce himself and get into the great stuff we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Grace, for your graceful introduction. Welcome, everyone. I tried to keep track of all of these places that you all are from, and I will just read out the places that I have been and that some of you are from. So I saw Munich, California, Phoenix, Austin, Brisbane, Dallas, Mexico City, London, Vancouver, and Melbourne. All those places I have visited, but I did definitely see a few others that I would love to visit: Nigeria, Cape Town, and Taiwan. So very impressed with this diverse audience, very delighted to be here. I myself from a little village in the northern of Belgium, that's why I grew up. Most people of my age on those days went out after school to manage their farm or go work in a factory. I realized a few years later, I was the only one of my primary school class that made it to university. So that's where I'm originally from. I discovered early on in life that I think you need to distinguish what you like to do and what you're good at. If you would ask me at primary school, I wanted, of course, to be a football player. But then I realized probably quickly that, well, whilst I like doing that, I wouldn't make a living of that. So I went to university, studied economics, probably because I realized I had a good gift for logical thinking or logical mathematics. If you're very advanced in mathematics, although I'm proud to be an economist, I think you then get to do science or become an engineer. I like mathematics good enough to be intrigued by it, but also law. I think that kind of defines me as an economist. You tend to be partly mathematically gifted, but also interested in how business and especially the legal part of business works. I landed then after university, traveled the world for a year and a half. That's why I got to see some of the places that you all live in. And I started working for what today I guess we would call a startup, but I don't think people had invented that word 30 years ago yet. There's two professors of my university who founded something that today we would call a venture, but also we did not know that word. It was the early days, early 90s, when spreadsheets were making it to the financial departments, and we were developing a first version of financial modeling. So that's how I started my career. It then became clear that advisories like Big Four firms had a big need to help their clients with early days of financial modeling. So I landed with one of the Big Four firms, and then the insurance industry seemed, in Europe at least, very much in need with help for good financial planning and analysis. So I then landed in Switzerland, as there's a lot of insurance companies in Switzerland that I served out of the Big Four advisory. Then went to join one of the clients, and that's why I landed in reinsurance, where I've been for quite some time. Worked in New York exactly when the heart of the financial crisis was happening, 2007 through 2009. So sailed through that storm, and then spent back at headquarters in Switzerland. I did spend a lot of time in India, Bangalore specifically, building up shared service center for treasury and cash management. And through the years, I wasn't immune to new legislation such as Sarbanes-Oxley, so I got the honor of making one of the companies Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. So that's when I decided I better get myself certified as an auditor as well. So I did that as part of my ongoing learning. And maybe we can get later into what got me into blockchain, but I think the one word that I would call out here is smart contracts, and we can explore that a little bit together. In a group of economists, I think the power of smart contract is probably the starting point of how we might want to explore what blockchain can do in the modern world.
Thanks so much, Paul. And actually, when we were planning this this meetup, it actually first started with internet computer, which I had never heard of actually, and we will get into that later. So, and then I asked, but blockchain, I do know, and many of us do have experience with or understand, and so that's why hearing Paul's own career story, and then and he'll share more just how he got into that world, I think was really eye-opening for me to hear, because it is one thing to learn about it and read about it. It's quite another to track and listen to what it is in real life. And so for folks like me, I know audience, you're all in different places, but for me to hear what it means in real life and to actually hear someone talk through, I think is really important. That's why this conversation is so great. So Paul, could you continue to talk about at what point and how your world, or you got into the world of blockchain in the work that you were in insurance?
Sure. In hindsight, it was probably on a day that we will never forget, September 11, 2001. This might sound very strange to you. I worked for the insurance company or reinsurance company Swiss Re that was the insurer of the World Trade Center. And those of you who remember that may also remember that this was followed by a long legal battle whereby, because it became clear that the way that building was insured was not that very clear. To keep it simple, some of you may recall some of that, the claim was a $3 billion difference between what the insurance compensation should be. Now, you may Google and go back to figure out what I am talking about, but the notion that what struck me is what in insurance and law is called contract uncertainty. So contract uncertainty, in very simple words, in our day-to-day life, we may have an accident and then be frustrated that we thought our insurance policy covered it, to then find out we did not read the fine print. And contract uncertainty is a legal term that you often hear in insurance that can, in the worst case, it goes to litigation. In the better case, it goes to some kind of negotiation where the claimant and the insurer then, through some type of negotiation, often also a third party intermediary, comes to a consensus. This made me, when I then some years later started hearing about smart contracts, and then one person that's often labeled as kind of the inventor of smart contract is a gentleman called Nick Szabo. Nick Szabo is probably one of the most talented people who has both a law degree, I think of Georgetown University, and a computer science degree of Stanford University, which are probably not pretty good places to have a degree of. And it goes a bit back to my prior point of where having a good mathematical brain wired also thinking as a legal person is not a surprise that this gentleman, Nick Szabo, is quoted often as kind of the person inventing the smart contract. And what he basically, I then happened to meet him in the early days. I was exploring blockchain around 2015. And it struck me how, although he's such a knowledgeable person, he could explain a smart contract in a very easy way. And what he used as an example is a Coke vending machine. It might be surprising. What on earth does that have to do with blockchain and smart contract, which always sounds very sophisticated? And which is, in my personal view, a very big forte of people of high intellect who nonetheless can explain things simply. And why he said this is like a Coke, what happens in a Coke machine? There is input, some coins. There is output, a can, plus maybe change. Somehow in that machine, there is a logic that can compute that the input of some coins gives you the output of this particular chosen can and some change. So there's kind of some very simple computational logic. That is kind of in very simple illustrative way what smart contracts are. A input in computer science, it's often called, that's the state before you put input into some type of calculation. Can be the same like lots of data you put in your spreadsheet. Output is the result of the calculation. So this can be the calculations that some simulation runs in your spreadsheet. And the novel, now that might sound quite normal, the novelty is that blockchain introduced the ability to run this logic on distributed computing. Distributed computing can be very helpful if a large group of people need to agree very efficiently on a transaction. And if you have heard about the initial paper, the Bitcoin white paper, of Satoshi, that actually explained that in a more extensive way, how smart contracts work in a distributed computing environment. So the Coke machine is a simple example, but let's now assume you have an insurance contract. So Grace's car is insured and she reports a certain claim. The insurance company is her counterparty and Javier might be the broker. And let's assume they disagree on the claim that Grace has submitted. If we all would be the blockchain, basically Javier the broker, Grace as the claimant, and the third person, the insurance company, would basically submit to this group the inputs of this legal contract. And in a distributed way, all of us, if we would form the blockchain, we would, in an efficient way, reach basically what is often called consensus. So there is no one central party. There is no one central point of vulnerability. There is a group, a distributed group. It could be all of us. In Bitcoin, that's called mining. Each of us contribute to that basic consensus calculation. So back to your question, Grace, I was far away from the detailed computer science elements of blockchain, and but I started really with the very important business reality that in a business like insurance, you often have a legally binding contract that you think is absolutely clear. And when it needs to be relied on, it is remarkable how the contract is not very clear. And the promise of much of the promise of blockchain actually is to, in mathematical, very clear rules, define contracts, which are often some combination of if, then, else relationships, and make business transactions much easier to execute without unnecessarily relying on manual steps and intermediaries.
Thank you. There was a question that a lot of you sent in questions, some really good ones, and we chose a couple. And One of them is, why do you think traditional finance corporations are still failing at implementing blockchain technology? So when I'm listening to you talk, it sounds great. It sounds like a smart business idea, but why this question, and maybe in general, why haven't more companies adopted or are not ready for blockchain technology?
I think it's not necessarily like ready for technology. Sometimes, rightly so, can be criticized a lot with the so-called expression, a hammer looking for a nail, or a solution looking for a problem. And to be a bit also self-critical, those who, like I am now, try to apply blockchain, I think it's a fact that sometimes blockchain is described by people like that. So if I take financial institutions, Grace, I don't think it's so much the one or the other. It's not so much like, will TradFi win and DeFi win, or will traditional finance versus disrupted blockchain-enabled finance win? I think it's more, I would start first of all with the user experience. If you think about money transfer, we've come a long way, but we still do not have 24/7 easy, low cost, efficient money transfer. There's some interesting publications around that. The remittances world is still not 24/7. And I think that is just one example of where a blockchain-enabled process can take some of the processes of financial institutions and make them lower cost, faster, and also scalable. And scalable is a new thing until today. And one of the things why Dfinity embarked on R&D 5 years ago is to come to a new type of blockchain, like post the initial Bitcoin, post the Ethereum that followed thereafter, to make it also scalable. I think this is one of the key things for financial institutions, at least, that taking payments just was one of the processes in financial institutions. It is a process whereby, rather than traditional finance being afraid of Revolut and the likes, PayPal and the likes disrupting their business, I think the lesson to take from that is that these are the type of processes where customers these days, when we can 24/7 very easily transmit to anyone in the world a recorded video, why would we not be able to send $100 to anyone around the world for 24/7 as well?
Mm-hmm.
In a trustworthy, easy, and low-cost way. And that's just then the easy part. Now let's go back to that insurance example. Now Grace needs to receive $100 for her insurance claim. That $100 shall be paid by me as the insurer if Javier as the broker agrees, and if some other elements have been verified. Let's, for example, assume that I need the claim expert to have verified your claim and declared accepted. Now now we have something a little bit more sophisticated than just sending over $100. Now we have a transaction of $100 going from A to B, subject to some conditions. Then you maybe start seeing how such smart contracts can actually be a very renewing or very revolutionary user experience, because we all often wonder, when such processes happen, why does it need to take 7 days or weeks for something that in hindsight was actually just a few days, basic data points to verify? And that's, I think, how processes can be made smarter. I don't think it should be a debate around technology. I think it should be one about using technology in a smart way.
Mm-hmm. Someone in the comment box did mention speed also as well. There's a question here from Ying. Blockchain tech is typically associated with finance. Are there any current applications in other industries, such as procurement, as an example?
Yes, supply chain tracking is one that you often see, because also the identification either of an object or of a person can be something that can be significantly optimized in a decentralized system as well. Examples that I've seen is in shipping, for example, where there's many different intermediaries from customs to different brokers that are involved, and to actually have a track and trace that is very transparent to all different parties. Or even a much more basic application that has been developed on the internet computer is a messaging app that does everything that Telegram, Signal, or WhatsApp does, but runs fully on chain, which therefore means that you do not depend on one single party that owns the app like Facebook, but also that the data is really owned by all the users of that messaging app. And in this particular case, you can not only send messages, but even cryptocurrency through the same app. I think the common thing around most of these things is that users of an application collectively determine what the application should do, and users retain full ownership of their data, rather than being dependent on a central operator.
All right. I see what Omer wrote in the comment box, and a question that also came through earlier is why, let's see, what is it? Can you talk about some of the biggest hurdles you see on the path to mainstreaming, or for the mainstream to adopt blockchain technology?
Maybe I'll start with taking a few minutes to explain the case, at least of the ICP tokenomics, because I think the first hurdle is probably a bit of anxiety, in particular, given what happened over the last 12 months, right? We've all seen what happened last year, last year around FTX. We've seen various examples of misuse of use of crypto. And so I'd like to maybe just take a moment to explain what we call tokenomics, because when crypto gets this bad reputation, it might give you the false impression that this is just a way for people to try to just obtain in very short time financial gains that is pure speculation. Or you may have seen examples where, unfortunately, people's crypto assets thought that they were safe and they have proven not to be. So maybe I'll share this one slide here, talk a bit about tokenomics. But the point that I'm making is what I would always advise the first thing when you look at whether you would use or invest in a certain cryptocurrency, the first question I would ask myself, do I see that whoever has issued that has a sound tokenomics? Let me explain what we mean with tokenomics. So it's token and economics. In the case of ICP, it's actually a utility token. So it has a utility. And to illustrate it with this simple graph going clockwise from left to right, on the left, you see developers. So it could be any of us who has a great idea, like these couple developers that had an idea. Let's create a new WhatsApp. Let's create a messaging app on a blockchain. These developers, they use our currency ICP, and they basically buy some compute and storage power on our decentralized network, which is what you see in the middle. That is so-called, that's demand. That is ICP that's being, as we call it, burned. So it reduces the supply. On the right side, you see what is increasing supply. When the network operates, it rewards people who hold ICP for their loyalty. When you hold ICP, it's often referred to as staking, meaning you lock it. You cannot sell it for, say, 2 years. During that time, in the case of the internet computer, you obtain voting rights. So look at this as part of a community. If we would form a community, some of you would have some ICP and stake that. You receive voting rights. your voice will be heard when changes are made to the network, new applications, the infrastructure being enhanced, etc. And then lastly, on the bottom right, this infrastructure, of course, needs to run. In Bitcoin, you may be familiar with Bitcoin miners, or somewhat familiar, not the same, but a bit similar in the internet computer world. It's what we call node providers. And node providers are actually all these little blue things on the bottom in the middle of the screen. These are individual small data centers where people around the world run computers that together make up the internet computer. These nodes, which aggregate in what we call subnets, at the end run these different smart contracts. They obviously also need to be rewarded for the compute and storage they provide. So we mint constantly some new ICP to reward for staking and voting and for running node machines. And we burn when those who have applications that are being developed bring them online. And as in any economics, when supply and demand is reaching equilibrium, that determines the price. Now, this is just one example of a tokenomics, but I think one of the things that has failed, back to your question, Trey, is for things to become mainstream. There's basically been a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's basically been tokens that had no real substance behind it, that did not really have solid tokenomics underneath it. So my first advice would always be ask yourself the question when you're looking at any of the cryptocurrency: what is it actually used, and is there actually a tokenomics behind it?
I see more conversation happening here. This does feel like a rather expansive topic, and just depending on people's perspectives. Let's see. John here, actually, John's question is good. I want to ask one before Lucas, and audience, as you know, these kinds of Q&A, we do kind of have to switch gears sometimes. Lucas asked, there's much discussion around the ecological impact of blockchain mining. Can other data science provide similar functionality, a similar approach to predictive analytics used for forecasting, where complex algorithms incorporate multiple factors come to a result?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's a fair point that the efficiency in terms of like kilowatt hours used per unit of compute, to put it very technically, has not been good in early days of blockchain. So, or to put this into more simple words, when I was before taking the example of Grace's insurance claim and saying, let's assume all of us have to repeat that computation to come to consensus, it's probably easy to understand that something consumes more energy if multiple parties repeat the computation and then come to consensus. Now, this is one of the key things why Dfinity started R&D some good 5 years ago, to reach basically a good middle ground between the advantage of decentralized computing. So decentralization, like the internet 30 years ago, the internet was actually, this was amongst others, designed to resist a nuclear attack. Right? Decentralize a network so that if one part of the network is under attack, the entire network shall still survive. So that notion of decentralized computing is also essential with blockchain. However, it has certainly in the early days led to low efficiency. One of the key things that Dfinity Foundation has helped develop on the internet computer is something that we call chain key cryptography. We can't go to all the technical details here, but it is essentially a way to establish such consensus protocol, different from what you see in other protocols referred to, for example, as proof of work, which is a very resource intensive one. We have managed to still reach a consensus process, but do this in a much more efficient way. And this picture I showed before, where you have these different nodes that sum up to subnets, and then run the smart contracts. In this consensus protocol, we've basically found a way that uses advanced cryptography to have this consensus protocol still benefit from the decentralization, but run in a much more efficient way. If you want to see some of the statistics specifically, there's an online dashboard that we have. It's simply dashboard.internetcomputer.org. And we publish constantly all of our statistics there. We've also recently done a report together with a third party where we've compared the resource intensity of our blockchain network to others. To give you one example, today on a classical blockchain network like Ethereum, it is basically impossible to just store one picture. If you take one JPEG file, it would cost you multiple $10,000s of dollars. To illustrate indeed the fair point that was in the question of the inferiority, that we have dramatically been able to change on the internet computer. So for the first time, not just basic simple logic, but also data will be able to be held on a decentralized blockchain environment.
I'm glad you started talking about Dfinity Foundation. I'm asking a pretty simple question here, but why haven't I heard of internet computer before? It's obviously I'm not in that field either, but maybe actually back up a little bit. How did you become involved with Dfinity Foundation yourself? What was your what's the passion there? And maybe just expand a little bit more about the work of the Dfinity Foundation and the World Computer and what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Dfinity Foundation is a fully R&D focused foundations under Swiss law, but it has operations also in the US, mainly San Francisco, and some smaller operations also in Asia and a couple other places in Europe. As one would expect, the foundation, in our case, it's a non-for-profit foundation. Our R&D goal is to be the main contributor to develop the internet computer, how we have labeled the type of the blockchain that we have been developing. One reason, Grace, why it might not have been so known is that it's been focused since its origin in some good 6 years ago in hardcore R&D. So we sometimes have jokingly describe ourselves as the type of people who do first and then market about it. And perhaps others have inversed that. But we kind of try to be, we're quite comfortable that it's better to make sure that there is very robust things under the hood first, and then starting to market about it. Our protocol or the network went live, which is often referred to as a Genesis event in the summer of 2021. So we're still fairly young. Bitcoin has been around for many years, Ethereum as well. Some of the other Ethereum derivatives or ERC protocols built in Ethereum have also been around for more than 2 years. So it's because of being very R&D focused and because of that R&D that only came to a go live a year and a half ago. That's probably it myself. I often said this was probably the best kept secret in Switzerland. When I returned from the US in the late 90s, and then some 6 years later, when I returned from US in 2009, and then 5-6 years later started getting into blockchain, it took 3-4 years until I suddenly discovered that 2 blocks away from where I was working in Zurich, there was this company called Dfinity. Mm-hmm. So to Dfinity's credit, I would say it's probably their modesty and their R&D focus that kept them to be a hidden jewel. And I'm surrounded by some of the most brilliant PhDs, and probably one of the few people who doesn't have a PhD in mathematics or science or computer science around here. And Dfinity is, as a foundation, increasingly now also seeing many more people than the about 200 people that work in the foundation. There's many more people out there that we refer to as our ecosystem that are developing applications on its ecosystem. So the foundation's role is to continue to be the kind of the invisible hand that makes sure that upon requests of the ecosystem, so these the voting principle that I mentioned briefly when you stake, well, that is basically by the way by which the community decides what the foundation or anyone else should further enhance the protocol with. We're a group of very diverse nationalities. In innovation, you do need, it's very distributed, but as it is often with very creative, innovative work, it does help to be at least co-located in a couple places. As innovation we work also quite remotely, but we do have a central office. It does benefit sometimes for people to literally get in a room behind the whiteboard and ideate and create things. And that's what our foundation is for. It is to keep operating the activities to further develop the internet computer.
What do you see as the future and the adoption? So let's just taking me as an example. So for instance, my first thought was, well, I never heard of the internet computer. Okay, great. Now I know what it is. And in my mind, it exists as a parallel universe. But obviously there's tremendous work being done, and maybe it is because it's still early stages. So is it, what future do you see in the next couple of years for the adoption of, or will it reach a critical mass at some point where enough businesses and industries adopt this? So just your general sense of future.
Yeah, I think if you think of it at the risk of almost being a bit philosophically, but I will take a step back. Maybe the first thing is what I would call perhaps a macro event. Like, unfortunately, I think we are surrounded by a couple not so benign macro events around us, right? So just thinking of the pandemic that we just had behind us, or unfortunately still the Ukraine war, one that isn't over yet. So that I would call a macro event. I mean, my parents still lived the Second World War, and I heard in school about the Marshall Plan. Some of you may recall from your history books, the Marshall Plan was about rebuilding everything that was destroyed in Europe in the Second World War. So I hope soon there'll have to be a kind of Marshall Plan to rebuild Ukraine. That's what I would call a macro event. And think about how we then, in today's world, do that most efficiently. The world or people will need to decide what gets priority and being rebuilt. There'll be big money flow to finance all of that. Often in history, these things have not always gone so well. We know a lot of infrastructure projects where the money has flown in, but half of it disappeared because of corruption. So that's where I would start, I think, and then we can then go into how money flow can be significantly improved with blockchain, and I can write a book about that. But I on purposely often want to take a bit of a step away, to not be that hammer looking for a nail. So I do believe that, let's say, what would be a very laudable initiative, if we want to rebuild Ukraine, and there's other things I see there's participants from Africa. I can see so many advantages on getting aid projects, on getting projects that need infrastructure to be rebuilt. It often, besides others, slows down because of a lack of very efficient, traceable, zero leakage money flow. So that is, I think, the macro event. The more micro event is what people, especially young people these days, get excited about, right? Someone told me this morning, as a reminder, what is the most downloaded app in the United States? TikTok. So that is, to me, the micro element. So the youth probably is not listening to my speech about rebuilding Ukraine. The youth is not really listening too much like, are you aware what happens with your data in China when you upload it in TikTok? So I'm being very honest and realistic about this balance, right? So this is what today's Gen Z, I think, is excited about.
Yeah.
And then there's macro events like Ukraine war.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of benefits from modern so-called new finance, using this type of technology to improve money flow, to have smart contracts. So if conditions are met, money will flow from A to B and it will not leak in between. There is many other applications in South America. There has been property registries, so property official registries, so that it's absolutely sure when you are the owner of a piece of land, a corrupt government cannot come in and just claim suddenly that land is not yours. There's been good examples, I think El Salvador, that have basically digitized their entire property registries.
Wow.
I think those are the type of things I always would like to think about when there's real needs that bring humanity forward.
Yeah.
We'll then find the right technology for it, and that technology needs to be efficient and it needs to be energy efficient. And I think at Dfinity we've come a long way for that now to be the case and not to be the hammer looking for a nail.
Yeah.
But that, I think there's probably a lot of economists amongst the student, and I would always encourage to think business case first. And when that business case has some rationale, yes, we believe that the computer science that we are developing has a lot of good applications, but there must be a good business case to it.
I really appreciate how you've unpacked that in a way that it is contextual. It's never just about one specific thing we're talking about. We have to consider the macro and the micro, and that's where I'm really getting a lot of insight, and it's making me think a lot, because it's everything affects everything. So when we have these conversations, whether you're coming from the point of view of a business owner or working for an industry or just as a user, they all are connected. And so to have that awareness is so important. So I really appreciate how you've kind of, you always link it to a story or something of a metaphor, which is really also helpful to understand. Are there some exciting projects that are, like, for instance, Jordan was the first point of contact for my entry into this world. And as I understand it, he's developing, I don't think he's here. He's developing an app that your foundation, or he's applied to, and he's working with your foundation. Are there some exciting projects that Dfinity Foundation's working on or partnering with? Yeah,
well, it's more about partnering with, right? Yeah. And I used the expression invisible hand before.
Yes.
Because we're a foundation. You can kind of, it's an imperfect analogy, but we're kind of like the scientists in California 30 years ago, academics and others that invented the internet. And there was some link to Switzerland as well, as the World Wide Web inventor was at the time in Geneva. And then the thing was out there. There's no mayor of the internet. There's no CEO of the internet. There's also no CEO of the internet computer. So yes, there's a lot of exciting things about it. And then we want the community to decide what shall be developed, right? And that's quite important, because before I was making the point about use cases, the other thing that we are strong believers also is that entrepreneurs with good ideas should have a fair chance to bring their ideas to life, right? I see there are some participants from Nigeria on the call, and we have actually quite interesting user group in Nigeria that's doing online blockchain courses, and is very much jumping on the train of using internet computer. And we might not always be aware, but it's still quite difficult for a young entrepreneur, say somewhere in countries that aren't as close to providers as we are, to bring your application alive. You need to choose, well, what cloud provider do you go with? What firewalls do I build up? I need to get into the Google store. Okay, that if you go Android, then you need to be permitted by Apple if you go iOS. Why is that so difficult? If someone has a good idea and knows how to code and has an internet connection, should actually be able, that talent should be rewarded with such new application to be brought alive in a very simple way.
Mhm.
And the type of apps that we see, I mentioned a messaging app, there's social media apps. So there's applications being developed on the internet computer that are very similar, almost doing the same as what you see from LinkedIn.
Mhm.
There is actually an application that does it's almost a mirror image to TikTok. It's called Hot or Not. There's an application that does almost the same as what we know from Medium, so a publishing application.
Mhm.
And the key thing is that a small group starts that, and then when they go live, soon after going live, they also have the ability to what we call tokenize. So what that means is the application actually issues its own tokens, and these tokens can be bought by the users. And this is also a sign of if the users support what they have seen so far, they will literally buy into it, literally.
Mm.
And again, using that tokenomics I used before, now you are de facto kind of a co-owner of the application, like in a cooperative.
Okay.
And in a cooperative, you have the members of the co-op exercising their voting. So, and this is last week, actually, one such application, its name is OpenChat,
Oh, yeah.
went tokenized. And to give you an idea, they raised within, I think, 8 hours, $6 million. Fully online. You don't need a investment banker. You don't need the classical IPO process. It's a fully blockchain enabled, consider it crowdfunding, by which you go to those who have already used, in this case, your messaging app, and allow them to further support the continued development. And then that will have a tokenomics similar to what I was explaining with our own ICP. Right? If users choose to hold it, they'll have so-called staking rewards. If the developers keep continuing to buy compute and storage power, they will burn, and the supply and demand will be in equilibrium. There's also, just finally, for the more finance savvy people, there's also more financial markets oriented applications, so-called decentralized exchanges. So for those of you who have already dealt with crypto, you might be familiar with the large central exchanges such as Coinbase, Binance, or Kraken. But what is developing now also, these decentralized exchanges. So exchanges that are not on these large, owned by large central operators, but exchanges basically on which you can connect your so-called self-custody, your self-held coins. And it basically brings smaller groups together that can trade, so bring the supply and demand of their tokens together. And rather than being developed on classical information technology, with the way the internet computer has been designed, entrepreneurs have now been able to basically develop trading applications on a blockchain.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's exciting things. And audience, we actually are just about at time right now, and I'm curious now from these events, just from Quantic's point of view, as we roll out these events and having guests like Paul and Javier from Dfinity Foundation, so my attendees, if you could also give me feedback, you can either ping me separately or even find me on email. Do you want more events like this? Most people say yes. Most people want to know more because there's so much to learn. And I can see many of our audience members also have a plethora of information and expertise as well to have more exchange time. Thank you so much, Paul and Javier. This was such a learning experience for me personally, at least. And oh, Kelsey, there she is. She's in the audience. We want to close out now. We're on the hour. Thank you everyone for joining. I see I'm going to go back and read some of the messages and the questions and just get it. This gives us a sense of informing our future events, which we always want to be relevant and informative and a learning experience. And just want to bid you all farewell and have a great evening or morning or night, wherever you are. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Let's see.